Now, when you and I think Armageddon, we think like missiles and tanks and destruction. When John is writing Armageddon, that's not what he has in mind. Because Armageddon is an actual physical location where a number of battles had been fought, and God's people came out on top. It was a symbol of where God went to bat and got the big win for his people. But John is not giving us a longitude and latitude of exactly where this cosmic battle is going to take place. This is not what he has in mind. Instead, what he has in mind for his first readers, and now us, is this. He says, turn your minds back to the place where God came through. So the question then, logically for you and us, is, well, how do we remain faithful when that kind of stuff is going on around us? Well, the book of Revelation and the entirety of the scriptures point to one thing. And that thing is worship. Simply put, or for example, to worship is to set the people free who are holding you captive. To forgive is a form of worship. To worship means that you believe in and you work for justice even when you are currently experiencing injustice. To worship is to focus and concentrate and force yourself to believe in God, to depend on God, to be conscious of God when you feel quite capable of just taking care of yourself without God. Worship orients us to bear witness to this world that is on its way in the middle of the world and the chaos that we find ourselves in right now. Worship allows us to hold on tightly to the promise and to the peace of the Lamb, even when our world and our worlds are in chaos. Because you might remember from last week, if there is anything in your life that is a Savior that is not Jesus, then it is false, it's a sham, it's an imposter, it's not true. And what John further expands on this morning, he goes on and he says, well, guess what? You know what that is? Those other things that you are holding on to, those are the parts that are going to crumble. Those are the parts that are passing away. Those are the things people have banked their lives on that God's going to do away with once and for all. So the big questions for you and me this morning are ones like these. Where? Where do you need to hang on tightly to the promise and to the peace of the Lamb? And in doing so, what do you have to let go of? I mean, right here and right now, in order to do this with God, what do you have to do this to for the rest of your life? Where is it right now that you need to experience some holy insecurity? What are you hanging on so tightly to? What are you depending on? Are you depending on money? Is that what you're wrapped around, or is that what is wrapped around you? Maybe for some of you here this morning, you got to let that go. Is it a job? Are you hanging on super tightly to that for a number of different reasons? Has God been whispering something to you? And perhaps what I'm saying this morning, is that an affirmation that maybe that's not where you're supposed to be, and maybe you got to let that go? Is it a person? Have you banked yourself on a spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a kid? Is everything wrapped up in them? Have they become your Savior in one way or another? Do you need to let go of that part of them? Or maybe it's your respectability. That you've worked so hard to get your life in perfect order, and the last thing you want to do is people to look at you and say, that person doesn't have their act together. Sometimes worshiping Jesus authentically means that we look not so respectable to the rest of the world. And when you're in that spot, and everything around you is dry except for you because you are so afraid, because that's what holy insecurity does to us. Remind yourself, where's my Armageddon? Not missiles, tanks blowing up Armageddon, but Armageddon as that place, that location, that time where God took a hold of you, where he changed you, where he went to bat for you, where he won something for you, where there was a victory because he showed up in a real and tangible way. When you are afraid, remind yourself of that God has and will continue to come through for you. He's saying, that we will collapse like Rome when our need and desire for meaning lead us away from Jesus. He's saying that we will self-destruct like evil always does when we bank our worth and our salvation on anything other than Jesus. And when we try to squeeze others out in the game of life, we are enacting violence on them. And violence comes in many different shapes and sizes. It can be military, it can be social, it can be economic. When we do those kinds of things, we are no longer worshipers of Jesus. So what does this mean for you and I? Well, it raises hard questions. Questions like, well, what about all that I've worked for? What about all that I've earned? What about everything that is rightfully mine? Well, Revelation and Jesus says, let it go. But what if this discipleship to Jesus bit leads us into the poorhouse? Well, then we go poor. Come on. What if a foreign country invades Canada and they try to take us over and they kill some of us? Well, then we die. And this is where being a disciple of Jesus, a follower of the Lamb, becomes awfully disturbing. Because the question it leaves us with is this: what cost are we willing to pay to our communities, to our societies, to our cities, to our families, to our kids? What cost are we actually willing to give up in order to fully follow and worship Jesus? Just 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a friend about this very thing. He said to me, if I had to choose between my kids and Jesus, I'm choosing my kids every single time. And maybe sometimes you felt the exact same way. For me, some days, on most days maybe, I can't do this. It's too hard. Everything is connected. All that I hold dear, all my systems, all my structures are all tied together in ways that if I start to give up on them, that's going to cost me something that I don't want to pay. And it's because I'm scared. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you are holding on to a lot and you don't want to let go because you are afraid of what's going to happen. And this is where worshiping Jesus and falling in line with the Lamb, this is where the rubber hits the road, because it's scary. Because the rest of the world runs on a different system. And if we don't play by those rules, we are destined to lose in that system. It'll hurt. It'll make us insecure. We'll be afraid. So may we this morning declare our full dependence on Jesus and hold on tightly, no matter how fast the traffic is on both sides of us. But in that, may we recognize that as we hold on tightly to Jesus, our worship is going to cause us to let go of the other things that we have found to give us stability in life. And in that, that's going to make us insecure. And if you're insecure in that way, it's okay. You're on the right path, but count the cost, Jesus says. It's going to cost you everything. So then, be careful. Don't live a self-preserving life where you are the pimp, just using the prostitute for whatever you need so that you can get at Park Place. That's the old system. That's the old way of thinking. God is wiping that away once and for all. That's not the way we roll. That's worship gone wrong. When we squeeze the life out of other people, when we collect all the resources selfishly to make sure that we're good and make sure that they lose. And remembering that when we do that as a whole, as a group of people, it's a synchronized compromise where human beings become slaves and they become nothing more than expendable products. But you and I, friends, us, we are meant for a better way.